This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
"85 episodes in. Thanks as always for clicking subscribe, for downloading, for the stream, however you're listening to Play-by-Playcast. My name is Joel Godet, and this is the podcast for broadcasters of a play-by-play variety, about play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development podcast diving into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. If you caught last week's conversation with Eric Reed, thank you guys for checking that one out. You can always flip back through our archives and find all of our previous conversations. Blown away, by the way, on the numbers recently. You guys apparently really liked the N-Shats conversation from the Pac-12 Network a couple of weeks ago, and the Brian Estridge conversation the week before that has done very well. Not surprisingly, Mike Breen, Len Casper, Boog Sciambi, episodes 77, 79, 80 have all gone over really well with you guys. So thank you guys for your continued listenership, and glad you are still 85 episodes in, enjoying these conversations, listening to them as much as I've enjoyed having them and putting them together here for you. Our guest this week, we head back to the college ranks. I was going to say it's our first college broadcaster in a while, but I just said Brian Estridge from TCU was episode 81. We haven't had a ton of college voices, though. Toby Rowland from Oklahoma recently. But good to head back to the Division I ranks and chat with the voice of the North Carolina Tar Heels, Jones Angell, this week. A guy who took over in 2011 following the 40-year career of Woody Durham. And we'll talk a little bit about Woody Durham and what Jones Angell learned from him, took from him, admired from him, what it's like to have to follow him in Chapel Hill. We'll touch on that and much more here with Jones, including the old hits. We'll talk a little bit about what he thinks makes good play-by-play. We'll talk about his preparation, what he thinks is really important, like the one or two things that he absolutely needs when he comes to preparing. We'll talk about theater, too, at the end, for what that's worth as well. But a fun conversation with Jones Angell that also includes what it's like to broadcast a pair of national championships. One a victory, one a buzzer-beating defeat. So we'll kind of get the juxtaposition of handling those two situations and having those two calls still early on in his Division I broadcasting career. But let's dive right into it without further ado. We're actually going to start with something totally off the wall. Because this is a great lesson in research. If you go to Wikipedia, and like I always start with Wikipedia, it's a great starting point. If you go to Wikipedia, it says that Jones Angell wanted to be a sports broadcaster from an early age, but his mother objected to it, and he still did it anyway. And I thought that was interesting. I could not corroborate that anywhere, but I was like, you know what, like somebody went through the effort to put that on Wikipedia. Either A, it must be true, or B, they're trying to get someone like me to ask that question, and, well, they were successful. So that's where we start with Jones Angell this week, and then we'll get into the good stuff, I promise. It's the voice of the North Carolina Tar Heels this week on Play-by-Playcast. Jones Angell, check it out. I read that you wanted to do play-by-play as a kid, but it was against your mother's objections. Is that true, and why?
That is not true. I didn't even know. Number one, I didn't even know I had a Wikipedia page, and number two, I didn't know that was on there. So, surprisingly, the information there was incorrect.
And see, kids, this is why you have to pay attention in school, because you're supposed to go to hard source materials. So, with that being said, How did you get into play-by-play, and why did you want to get into play-by-play, and kind of at what point in your life did that come around?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that I really enjoyed athletics and that I enjoyed being around athletics. I enjoyed the lessons that I think athletics can teach. I enjoyed the camaraderie of a team, just all those kind of things. But I just wasn't good enough to compete at any kind of high level athletically. And so I wanted to find a way, if possible, to be around it because I did enjoy it so much. And so, I realized that this was something that that I had the potential to be good at, that, I had done some theater stuff and, just some different things, been on the air. And I use that in very loose quotations, doing some stuff in high school. And so I realized that it was something that was a potential for me. And so I was able to kind of put those two things together and marry it in an opportunity. And, I got really lucky in that when I was in school, I got an opportunity to work with our radio network and was able to advance kind of very slowly, but advance through the ranks here in one place, which is an unusual thing, as you know, in this profession. And so to be able to learn from some really great guys and to do what I wanted to do at a place that I really enjoy was really fortunate for me.
Yeah, so tell me about that. You go to school at UNC and really never leave. Kind of walk me on that path for you in terms of what doors opened up, why you wanted to stay there or why you wound up staying there, and I guess if there was ever a point in time where you felt enticed to go a different way but wound up making the decision that ultimately winds up being the right one for you.
Sure, yeah. Correct. I went to school at Carolina, and after my sophomore year, so between my sophomore and junior years, I started doing some intern work with our radio network. And Joel, quite honestly, that was just doing whatever help they may need. And that was getting people lunch. That was, checking records in the media guides. That was helping to create, promotional stuff during the summer. I mean, just anything that was beneficial, I tried to do. And then that moved into my next school year, and I would come down after I was done with class. And, sometimes there'd be stuff that I could help out with, and sometimes there wouldn't, but I'd just kind of hang around and learn and look and, kind of get my hands into things and see if I could continue to just figure things out. And so as time went along, I was able to, one, get a couple opportunities to be on the air, which was, filling in for our scoreboard guy, for example, during football and basketball, or calling women's soccer on the internet for the first internet-only broadcast that we ever did. Whether that was doing some fill-in work as an analyst for women's basketball, just anything that I could do to get some experience, I tried to do. And then while I was doing that, I was shooting camera for the coaches' television shows, or I was staying here late Saturday night and I would deliver. At the time, that was still where you'd have an actual physical tape, and I would deliver the tape to the TV station at 4:00 in the morning or whatever on Saturday after the production was done after a late night Saturday night game. So I just kind of hung around. And then in hanging around, I did a couple of different things. I was able to get some experience. I was able to vary my skill set. And I was also able to prove myself to be valuable. And I tell young broadcasters all the time that I do think two of the most important things you can do is vary your skill set, because, as you know, you're not going to just jump right into being on the air immediately. And a lot of times when you get started in this business, you are kind of a one-man band, and you have to do so many different things. And then also prove yourself valuable to as many people as possible, because eventually one of those people is probably going to be the one to help you. And so I was able to kind of do all of that in one place. So then that went from a couple of big moments that occurred, and one was quite honestly a very tragic moment. And the gentleman, his name was Stephen Gates, who did our baseball play-by-play and our women's basketball play-by-play and was our sideline reporter for football. Stephen was killed in a hit-and-run accident where his car had a flat tire, and he got out to look at the tire and was hit by a car and was killed. And so Obviously an extraordinarily emotional moment for us here. Stephen was a good friend of mine. I had done broadcast with Stephen. He was just a couple years older than me. And so, he and I were friends. He was friends with so many people around here. And so when that happened, first of all, it was a shock to our system, of course. And then, eventually I started doing some of the stuff that Stephen had been doing. And so that was the first time that I started doing women's basketball and baseball play-by-play. And then, so I did that for a couple of seasons, and then Mick Mixon, who was both our color analyst and kind of what we call on our broadcast the host of the broadcast. So, he would do our pregame, our halftime, our postgame. In addition to doing the analyst work, Mick moved on to be the play-by-play voice of the Carolina Panthers. And so Mick left for Charlotte, and when that happened, I kind of slid into his host role in hosting our broadcast. And then we had former athletes come in and take over the analyst role. Eric Montross on the basketball side of things, and at the time, a gentleman named Rick Steinbacher, who was a all-ACC linebacker here at Carolina, did the football. So I did that alongside, of course, Woody Durham this whole time has been our play-by-play voice at Carolina, and Woody did that for 40 years and is one of the best-known and most accomplished play-by-play voices on the college level there's ever been. So I got a chance to work with Woody, next to Woody there for his final 6 years, and then when he retired in 2011, after a national search, I was able to get the gig. And so I always tell people that it is not a usual path. You don't stay at one place very often and go from getting people lunch to being the play-by-play voice. That doesn't happen very often, but it just so happened for me. Now, you also asked me in that question, did I ever think about leaving? Why did I stay? Carolina is a really special place, and it's a place that's important to me. My parents went here, my sister went here, my wife went here, I went here. So it is an important place to our family. It's a terrific area of the country. So that was part of it. But I would not be telling the truth if I said I didn't always contemplate, taking that next step. And so, I worked when I was doing the hosting of our broadcast, I would prepare as if I was going to do the play-by-play, whether that was at Carolina or somewhere else, because I wanted that preparation to be ready for when that next step came. I didn't want it to be a shock to my system how hard you had to prepare to get ready for a broadcast. But I really only applied for 2 other jobs while I was going kind of through that whole journey at Carolina, and got to a finalist for both of them. The second one, they wanted me to guarantee that I wouldn't put my name in the hat for the Carolina job when it came open, and I wouldn't do that. And so I don't know if that's why I didn't get it or not, but I didn't get it. And so, but I did just explore a couple other positions while I was doing it. But eventually it all worked out in the end for me, and certainly love where I am and excited to cover the teams that I get the opportunity to cover. That was a long answer, Joel. I apologize.
No,
that's a long story.
We got a
I'm
podcast,
old.
so as long as you're still on the phone, we're good. What's it like as a Carolina kid with the lineage that you had at UNC in your family to, as a student, show up and it's like, here's Woody Durham, you're going to help him out today. What's that experience like?
So it blew me away. I felt, one of the things that I really enjoyed doing growing up is my dad and I would always turn down the sound and the TV and listen to the radio broadcast. So we'd watch on football Saturdays. We'd watch every Carolina basketball game, and we'd turn the sound down and listen to Woody and Mick call the game. And that's just something we did. And, I felt like I knew Woody and Mick, even though neither one of them had ever met me nor had any reason to know who I was. But, I felt like I had a relationship with them because I had gone through, as a Carolina fan, I had gone through so many great moments and so many tough moments with them. And I think that's part of the really fun part about being a play-by-play voice at one place, and especially at a place that people care about like they do at Carolina, is that you're able to build that relationship with people even if you don't know them. And so I was on the other side of it, and I've, again, grew up with those 2 guys. And so the first time I met them, I was totally starstruck. It could have been, you could name it could have been Michael Jordan, it could have been the President of the United States, it didn't matter. I was like, whoa, here's Woody and here's Mick, and they are right in front of me, and these are the guys that I've spent hours and hours of my life with, and I'm getting a chance to talk to them. And I remember the first thing I ever did, some June afternoon or something in that summer, was Woody and Mick were down there cutting station liners for the next year. So, they'd say, oh, you're listening to Carolina football on WTXY in Lexington or whatever it is. And they were just doing this for hours and hours and hours, and they asked me to go get them lunch. And I remember specifically driving down the road thinking, I have $20 of Woody Durham's money in my pocket. This is unbelievable. Like, it blew me away. And so it was really kind of a hitch-in-the-face moment for me when that happened. But the really cool part about that is as time went along, I was able to learn so much from both of them. And when you're talking about one guy in Woody who is, just is going into the Sports Media Hall of Fame here in the next class and is one of the greatest college announcers ever, when you get to learn from him and you get to learn from Mick Mixon, who is now, in one of the best jobs that you can have in our business as an NFL play-by-play man, and I got to learn and take things and see how they both were successful. And so I got to kind of take a couple little things from both of them and learn pieces from what they did. And, while what I do is not exactly like either one of them, there are definitely things that I took from them both. And so to be able to have that kind of hands-on tutelage, if you will, if that's even a word, to be able to get that hands-on teaching from those guys was really beneficial for me.
I was going to say, what did you learn from them? But that could go in any myriad of directions, so I'll try to pare it down. You mentioned having a relationship, feeling like you had a relationship with those guys, listening to them growing up. What is it about them on the air that you think helped create that feeling within you, the listener? And then maybe how do you kind of, I don't know if mimic is the right word, but how do you inherit that skill in what you do now?
That's a great question, and I think it's a couple different things. One is just the quality of their work. And by that I mean, I think when you're the play-by-play voice of one school, look, everybody knows that we want, on the Tar Heel Sports Network, we want the Tar Heels to win. But that doesn't mean that everything Carolina does is good, everything the other team does is bad, every call against the Tar Heels is the wrong call. That's not the case. But what I think Woody and Mick did so well was they hit the balance of what I like to call passion and professionalism. Mm. And if you're calling the game on ESPN or CBS or whatever, you've got to be right in the middle. And you should be. That's the expectation. But on the Tar Heel Sports Network, we can be, instead of, and I wish you could see me here. I wish this was a visual podcast. I've got my arms straight up when I say in the middle, and I'm going to put it at about a 45-degree angle or so when I say that's where we are. We want to balance that professionalism for the broadcast, but our passion for Carolina. And I think that's what Woody and Mick did so extraordinarily well. You knew, hey, they were Tar Heels, and you knew they were Tar Heels, and you knew that they wanted Carolina to be as successful as possible. But if Christian Laettner goes for 35 points for Duke, that's a story. You got to talk about that too. You've got to give them credit. If somebody for NC State rushes for 250 yards in the game and scores the game-winning touchdown, that's a story too. And so they were able to really, I think, balance that as well as anybody I've ever heard. So that's part of it. It's just how good they were at what they did in their specific role. Then here's the other thing, and I think this is true at any place, and I mentioned it in an answer earlier, is you go, when you're a diehard fan, you go through these moments with these people. And that is the highest of highs, the Tar Heels winning national championships, and that's, in sports terms, the lowest of lows when, you lose at the buzzer in the national championship game, or, Duke hits the first Carolina Duke game I ever did as play-by-play guy was when Austin Rivers hit the shot at the buzzer to beat the Tar Heels in the Smith Center. And in sports terms, that's a pretty rough night if you're Carolina. And so you build that relationship with people by being there with them for all of those moments. And that's why when Woody retired, it was never going to be easy for whoever sat in that chair next, because Woody had been there with people for so long. But you're able, as time goes along, and this is now my 7th year doing this, you're able to start building up those moments with people, positive and negative, that allow you to start having that relationship. So you need to do your job well. There's no question about that. But some of it is just time, and some of it is just being there in those situations with people, which really helps build that relationship.
You mentioned it, so I'll go there so I don't forget about it. But what was it like calling that national championship game? And take me in that moment of composure, of that stage, just walk me kind of through your mindset of that moment and that stage and the exact way that things all played out that night.
Here's the really fun part that I get to answer, Joel. I don't know which one you're talking about because the Tar Heels have been to the championship game back-to-back years in 2016 and 17, but I can still answer the question.
I was thinking when you mentioned buzzer beater, I was thinking the Villanova loss in particular, going from the high of it's a tie game to all of a sudden what just happened.
Yeah. So it was the hardest moment I think I've ever had on the air and trying to keep what I talked about a moment ago, that balance between professionalism and passion.
Yeah.
Because, obviously this was a monumental shot, and it's one that you have to give extreme credit to Villanova, to Chris Jenkins. It wasn't that Carolina didn't mess anything up. He just made an unbelievable all-time play, and sometimes that happens. But from the Tar Heel perspective, it just absolutely punches you in the gut and rips your heart out. That's as difficult a way to lose that type of game as there is, and maybe the hardest loss in a championship game ever. It's certainly one of them because of the way that it played out. What made it extra difficult is we were directly in front, our broadcast location, of the Villanova families. And so their players came over and were standing on our table, were reaching over us. I was in between a hug between somebody's mom and a player while we're on the air. And they weren't doing anything wrong. They weren't like rubbing it in anyone's face. They were celebrating, as they should have been, winning the championship. And so you're trying to keep your composure. You're trying to tell the story of what happened. You're trying to get it home, get the broadcast home. But you're trying to do all of that in what was a very emotional and just a very high-charged situation. So that was difficult, without question. I think particularly just because there was so much jubilation around you while you're trying to keep things kind of going. And so that was really, really hard. But I think we did an okay job with it. It's not like, we were sitting there dog cussing the Villanova players or anything like that. You got through it. And so I do think that, we're lucky here in Chapel Hill because Carolina's won a lot of championships in a lot of sports, and certainly Carolina basketball is important to people around here and around the country, and they've been very, very successful. But I think last year's championship is as special as any one Carolina has ever won because of the way that group came back from what happened the year before. Mm. And Joel, I'll tell you, Chris Jenkins, Villanova, those are all dirty words for about a year for Carolina fans. Now, there's still not a Carolina fan out there that wants to relive it or wants to talk about it or thinks it's a great time. But it kind of is seen in a different light now because I don't think the Tar Heels win in 2017 if they didn't experience what they experienced in 2016. And so now that moment, while it's still incredibly disappointing, and you hate it particularly for the seniors on that team, Joel James and Bryce Johnson and Marcus Page, that moment is more of a building block for what eventually happened in 2017. And so to be able to get back there and to be able to call, 2 consecutive championship games and to be able to have a championship call that, that'll be, I don't know if remember, but it'll certainly be saved because you keep all of those for sure. That's a really special moment for me. And I think it was a really memorable, emotional championship for not only the players and the coaches, but Carolina fans everywhere as well.
Can I juxtapose the Villanova call too against not even the national championship call, this past season, but the Luke May call, if we want to talk about like buzzer beaters, big moments. How did you think you handled the Luke May call, and what's different about, obviously, when you win, being able to walk that line of the professionalism and passion?
Well, I think the probably overriding part about our Luke May call is Eric Montross going crazy over top of it because he's so excited that Luke hit the shot. And people always ask me, and I'm gonna answer your question. People always say, "Oh, well, did you have what you wanted to say for the championship call? Did you have that written down?" And I always say no. I mean, you can't script. I didn't have a Luke May hits a shot with 0.3 of a second left. Let me flip to my note card and say what we're going to say. You don't have that. Now, I do think when you're in a championship game, you need to at least have some kind of idea. If you're up by 40 points with a minute left and you're going to win the game, you need to have some kind of idea what you'd like to say. But you're never going to write anything down or have it scripted. So the Luke May call, and Carolina's had a couple of buzzer beater wins through the last several years. It's the emotion of what's happening, and I think my favorite part about the Luke May call is that I can't even remember it word for word, but I know near the end of it that I immediately say 0.3 of a second because I think that's important. You need to know it wasn't the end of the game. Yeah. There was still, while 0.3 of a second you pretty much have it, it's not the very end. And so I do think that was I was pleased with myself for making sure that you got that in there at that moment. But that to me, wow, that of all the championship run last year for Carolina, that moment was probably the most special. That was a heck of a shot by Luke in an incredible game between two really good teams.
And I wanted to go down that path, but let me go back to, and I'm glad we did, but let me go back to the beginning of your UNC time as the voice of UNC as well. When you made that transition and finally jumped into that seat, I've read a bunch of interviews where you get asked about comfort and if you're feeling more comfortable. So I I've gotten that question a lot too, just being in a Division I job, replacing a guy who had been here for a long time as well. So I'm curious, as somebody who's also gone through that, what it was like for you to replace Woody and to feel comfortable and to feel like you were in your own spot finally, and kind of how long that took.
Yeah, it's funny, Joel, because and you may have been reading that, may have read me say this before, but I think this is true. I never felt uncomfortable, at least consciously. Now, that's not to say that my heart rate wasn't a little higher when we first went on the air when Carolina football was playing James Madison there to open up the 2011 season in the first game that I called. I mean, you got those nerves working a little bit because it's a big moment. But a couple things helped me. First, I had been on the broadcast for several years. So I had been around Carolina. I had been around our broadcast. I had been there, for Final Fours. I had been there for big football games. So I had been on our broadcast for big games. So that was helpful. And we didn't change anything else on our broadcast other than I slid over a chair and we brought in somebody else to fill my role. But everybody else stayed the same. Our sideline reporter was the same. Our analyst was the same. Our engineer was the same. I remember our parent company wanted to change the bump music for our coming in and out of commercial breaks. And I said, no, I don't want to change it. Not now. I want to keep that exactly the same because I didn't want it to feel like there was this huge overhaul occurring on the broadcast. And so that all of that stuff staying steady, all of that stuff staying consistent was helpful for me. Now, the longer I went, more people started to say, oh, you sound so much more comfortable on the air. And that may be true, and maybe I just didn't realize it, and that's the case. But I think a big part of that is people getting more comfortable with hearing me and being more comfortable with the fact that I was the person there now and not Woody.
Yeah, it's almost the other way around. It's not
right.
That you're more comfortable.
And again,
as they are,
I'm not saying that there wasn't a difference in what I was doing, and I'm sure just kind of subconsciously and naturally you do settle into it a little bit more. But I also think that was a two-way relationship as people continued to say that to me. And I'll say two more things. I do think basketball-wise, I felt really good about my level of preparation, about being ready to call a game, all those things. Football-wise, it had been a while since I had done football when I got the job. And so I do feel like that took a little bit of time just for me personally to kind of get my system of preparation, to get my system of information on game day, just to kind of get that exactly how I wanted it. And I still tinker with both football and basketball every single year, but I don't make major changes like I did in football the first couple of seasons, just changing some stuff that I did to get ready for games and those kind of things. So I do think that, you kind of settle into that level of expectation of your preparation and things like that. And then finally, the biggest play of
the Geo touchdown?
Yeah, it's the Geo touchdown.
Bernard fields it at the 26, heading to the far side. Geo at the 35. Geo, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Geo, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
It was this first moment that people had that was memorable to them, that it was my play call and not Woody's. And that play just got me so much equity and so much cachet with Carolina fans, just to say, okay, this guy can handle it. And for whatever reason, people enjoyed that call. That's still one of the number one thing, maybe not number one, but right up there as far as people talking to me or talking about a specific play or call, is they always mention the Geo play. And so that particular play was really important for me too.
What about it do you think stands out with them? And what do you think about it when you listen back to it now?
I don't know what stands out for people so much. I lost it a little bit for sure.
Which maybe is the thing. Like, I feel like when there's the utter shock in your voice that shows sometimes, and I think people like that.
Yeah, and I think people, I think that was that moment. And if you weren't there in Kenan Stadium, it's hard to explain it. But, yeah, Carolina had lost the state 5 consecutive years, which was pretty unusual. And it's hard to say right in the height, since the NCAA stuff finally just got over with a couple months ago. But, the NCAA stuff was really at a high peak at that point. And it was just a very emotionally charged atmosphere. And, Carolina had gone up early, and then State had taken a lead that looked like they were going to, do this again. They're going to win for the 6th year in a row. And they were up a couple scores in the fourth quarter, and the Tar Heels end up tying it, and you get excited just because the game's, the Tar Heels got a chance to kind of extend this game, and then, to run a punt back with 30 seconds left or 20 seconds left or whatever it was, that doesn't happen real often. And so it was just an emotionally charged, kind of unusual moment. And so I think the way I reacted was probably the way a lot of people reacted in the stadium that day. And so I think it was a very relatable moment for Carolina fans. When I go back and listen to it now, it is, I enjoy the call just because people like it so much. But it is also something that I have worked very hard on, and it gets me in football much more so than basketball, is I can tend to get a little screamy because you get excited and big things are happening.
Yep.
And in basketball, those moments are 2 or 3 seconds. In football, those moments are 8 to 12 seconds or whatever. And so 2 to 3 seconds of getting screamy is not a huge deal, but 8 to 12 seconds will wear you out. And so that's something that I've been very conscious of and tried to improve on, and think I've gotten a lot better at as the years have gone on. It's just trying to still have that excitement and enthusiasm and get fired up, but also not just be yelling at people. And so I've always thought that call was a little yelly, but I also, it brings back terrific memories and a great moment for Carolina football and a play that people have enjoyed so much.
I guess kind of along those lines, and if you want to break it up into football and basketball as well, in the, I guess, is this year 7? Or is this year 8?
7, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 7 years. Where do you think you've, I guess, most grown as a football and or basketball broadcaster, and maybe what do you think has helped in those areas or led to those areas?
I just think in football, just in a lot of different areas, I go back and listen to some early broadcasts, and it was fine. But I just think I've gotten a lot better, and our broadcast has gotten a lot better. But my play-by-play specifically, just in kind of filling in a lot of little details. I was very concerned early, and still concerned now, about being right. I think that's the number one thing, is be correct. But I was so worried about being correct that that's all I was focused on. And so now I think I've been able to, as time has gone on, been able to fill in some of the little gaps. And I'm talking little things here, Joel, whether just, which hash mark. I listened to a game we did early on, and I didn't say which hash mark the football was on the entire game. And so that's important, but it's also, it's something that you got to be able to slide in there. It's not the number one thing that you're concerned with, but it's an important note. And so just being able to fill in some little holes like that as time has gone along, I think has been really important. I think I've gotten a lot better in that area. And something I said a moment ago, the value of the preparation and kind of my system of preparation, I've really the last 2-3 years feel good about what I do as far as getting ready for a game. I have a very regimented system throughout the week to get prepared, to kind of focus on, I want to be at this point by the end of this day, and still be able to get all the other stuff that you got to get done throughout the week, but also get your preparation done. I feel like that has really settled in to a place that I feel good. Basketball wise, I've always felt pretty good about our basketball broadcast. That's not to say that you're not trying to get better or improve. But I've always felt good. We have a terrific analyst in Eric Montross on that side of things, who does a really good job. So that helps, of course. And so we cover teams that win a lot. So that part's been good too. So I've always felt pretty good about what we do on that side of things.
In basketball in particular, and this is just something that, we're driving back from Kent State last night, and I'm listening back to the game on the bus, and something that stuck out to me, because I had thought that, the last 4-minute war of regulation, I thought was pretty good, and I went and listened back to it, and there was a play in my head that I thought I called well, and then it was a rebound to our point guard who threw it up ahead, ball got deflected, and wound up with another guy on our team down court a little bit. And it all happened so quickly that kind of the deflection isn't in there in the play, because of the fact that it was tapped. It was like a straight line, and the guy that tapped it was in the middle of it. So I think it probably still would have gotten to where it was going in some respects. So in the actual play-by-play call, you just kind of hear El Amin, throws it up ahead, loose ball gets to Sellers. And I listened back to it, and my analyst caps it with, what a great play by Taylor Persons, able to, dives after that and gets the deflection up ahead. And I was like, but it happened so quickly that there was so much going on, and there's only so many words that fit in a small space of time. How do you best handle sometimes the speed at which a basketball game in particular happens, not necessarily to get every touch in all the time, but to get every touch in when they matter most?
Sure. It's a great question, and I do think that's the biggest challenge in basketball. And Carolina, using just my example, Carolina likes to play very quickly. And so, the Tar Heels try to push the ball up and down the floor. And so that you can get in those moments where there's just too much stuff to get in there. And I think a couple things become important. I think the role of the analyst there becomes important. You said in the example that you just gave that your analyst helped kind of, I'll use the term cleaning up, not to say that it was messy, but just kind of finishes up the call for you. And I think that's a sign of a really good analyst who realized, hey, that happened. We need to make sure that we get that piece of information in there too. So I think that was really good on his part to kind of help finish up the play call. But I also think that sometimes you got to get in what's most important first. And so it sounds like in this specific example of what you're talking about, what was most important is that it was pushed ahead, it was loose, somebody else got it, and they laid it in. And you got that part in. And so you have to, sometimes you just have to be, you have to worry about what matters most. And you also have to remember that you don't have to be word for word what is exactly happening at every second. You have a little bit of time to fill in the holes in radio. You have that ability. And so I think it's better to get the most important information in first and then fill in the holes than overtalk, get behind, get a little lost in what you're trying to say because you're trying to get everything in so quickly. And it sounds like on this particular play that you're talking about, that's what happened. And so to me, that I wouldn't blink twice on that. That sounds like a terrific execution of what you guys were trying to do. And I think that, again, I think you got to get in what is most important in the play needs to happen first. Then if you miss a detail that you feel is important, you got to fill it in on the backside.
Beyond time and score and getting it right and all those kinds of things as well, when you flip on a game, be it whatever sport, what separates not just good play-by-play from average, but like great play-by-play from good play-by-play to your ear?
Knowledge of the sport, knowledge of the teams, knowledge of the players. That's number one. You can tell if somebody was in Wichita calling a game last night and now they're in Lubbock, Texas calling a game the next night, and they've looked at the roster and they know the stats and that's about all they know, and you can tell, I think. So knowledge of the game, the teams, the individual players, I think that always sets things apart. Now, I also think there's a big difference between television and radio. I think in television, not over speaking, I think, is really important. I'll use Joe Buck, who I know for some reason takes a lot of heat.
I don't know why.
I thought his call on the Vikings play was awesome because he gave it enough and there was the emotion there, but he didn't say too much. And so I do think on television that becomes a lot more important. It's different on radio because you are you're filling a little bit of a different role. People relying on you more heavily for what's going on. But I think that being judicious with your words on the television side of things, I think, is very important. I think relationship with analysts goes a long way. And that's, where you're lucky in radio because most times you're working with the same person throughout the year. And so you build that repertoire with people where they kind of know when to fill in the holes like we were talking about. They know kind of when you're done talking and when they have a window to get in the information that they want to get in. So I think that's a big difference in the quality of a broadcast is when you do have that good relationship with your analyst as well. And I'm just trying to think. I mean, there's just so many things. But to me, I guess those would be the main things for me. And again, I think there's a big difference between radio and television because in radio, the play-by-play guy, in my opinion, is the most important guy because he's telling you everything. He's got to tell you where the ball is, what the score is, what the time is, who has it, what's happening, describe what's happening. Whereas in football, I think in television, the analyst is the most important guy. And so your role changes. You need to still kind of manage the broadcast much more than hardcore play-by-play. You need to manage what is happening. You need to set your partner up and kind of all those, a little bit of a different role than what you're doing on the radio side.
I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I want to, if I can cover two more very quick things with you. Well, maybe the first one's not all that quick. We'll see. We'll see how in-depth you go. But you've mentioned several times preparation. And I'm not necessarily, everybody's got their own boards and their own kind of unique ways of going about it. But I'm more curious for you, what's most important? If you had to do a game and had limited time to prepare, where do your eyes go first and what do you absolutely need? Or what do you think, if you want to go in a different direction, what do you think is important and unique to the way that you prepare and broadcast and gives you a different perspective that you like to bring to the table?
I think, and especially when you're calling one team, there's two things that I think are important. One is I think you need to find something that is more interesting than just he is averaging this amount of points and this amount of rebounds when you're talking about your own guys, your own team. And so I do, and that's one of the things I enjoy about covering one team is that you can kind of go on that journey with them. And like, for example, right now, Kenny Williams, who's had a terrific year for Carolina, shooting the basketball, but the last 4 or 5 games, he's 4 of 24 from 3-point range. And that's a big deal. And so I think kind of not only talking about that, but figuring out why. Why is that happening? Is that just this is a long season and you're going to go through a little dip? Has he lost some confidence? Is there something going on with the form? So I think that becomes important there are these kind of little mini stories, mini trends that go on during a long season that I think are worth discovering and talking about when they're relevant to what's happening at that point in time. And then we take a lot of pride in knowing the other team. So I think it's just as important to know the relevant storylines, the relevant stats, the relevant stories of the other team as it is of your team. And Carolina in my instance, and Ball State because you see them every game. You know that journey because you're there with them, and your listeners know that journey. But what's been going on with your opponent? Why have they won 5 in a row, or why are they scuffling right now, or why is this player averaging 25 points in the last 3 games, or whatever it is. And so I think that's really important. And in football, for example, I take a whole day on Wednesday where all I do is read stories from throughout the year that I've been printing out on the opposition and get to know kind of their journey of their season like by heart the journey of the team that you're covering. And so we try to make sure that we bring that aspect to what we're talking about as well, is why is the other team where they are? Because we know why the Tar Heels are there, but we're still going to talk about that. But why is the other team kind of at this point of their journey as well?
Last question I have for you is something you mentioned at the very beginning, and I want to possibly go more in depth with it. We'll see. You've got a little bit of a background when you were in high school in some musical theater. And I read an article where you said that it has helped you in a little bit of ways just being able to perform and speak in public. But, Kevin Brown we had on this podcast from ESPN a few weeks ago, and he had mentioned that he took improv classes because he thought it made him better as a broadcaster and able to respond more quickly in different situations. Do you think in some regards that, I don't know, having a theater background has helped you? I mean, at the end of the day, it is a performance in some regard, but has helped you be able to handle that kind of a situation and be able to kind of roll with different punches and I mean, on the musical side of it too, just kind of develop a voice maybe differently than someone who would just be getting into this as a speaker, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Absolutely, I do, because I do think that in that particular genre, I mean, if something you're out there, and if something goes wrong, you can't just run off stage, right? I mean, you got to figure it out, and every broadcast, there's going to be a challenging moment. You're going to get something wrong. There's going to, it's just nobody's ever done a perfect broadcast, and so I think it does help being able to kind of, as I think you said, kind of roll with the punches, be a little bit flexible, keep your level of where you're trying to perform. I'll use that word, with the understanding that you may have to adjust a little bit. And so I do think that it helped tremendously in that regard. But the biggest advantage for me is what you kind of said in that intro, and that's being comfortable speaking in front of a crowd. I think the thing I've gotten improved the most on since I started, the very first thing was going up and talking in front of big groups. I remember, because that's part of your role in doing this. I mean, for example, I'm hosting our baseball's first pitch dinner on Saturday, and there's going to be 700 people there. And that's just part of being the play-by-play voice at North Carolina, is you end up doing all these different events. And I would get 1,000 times more nervous doing that than I would being on the air for the broadcast. And so kind of that background I was able to fall back on after a little bit of time and say, hey, you know what, this is not that big a deal, and kind of fall back a little bit on some of that experience that I had. And now I feel like I'm 10 million times more comfortable doing those kind of events. And so I think that experience in my background, without a doubt, helped me in that regard.
It's one of those things I always wish if I could go back to college and like take some sort of acting class. I
think the improv class is a great idea. I'd never really thought of that before, but that's a great idea because you're kind of out there, you're kind of naked for everybody to see, and you got to figure it out. And I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean that's what we go through every time we go on the air. I feel like sometimes too. Jones, how do people get in touch with you if they wanted to find you on social media or just find you on the dial and hear some Carolina basketball or football?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We're pretty active on Twitter. I think you need to be in sports media, and we run all of our Tar Heel Sports Network stuff through mine. It's at Jones Angell. Angell does have 2 L's at the end. It's a little bit funky. So that's my Twitter address. We finally, after a long time, we've been able to get our streaming rights kind of freed up this year, which has been a big boost for us. So, Tar Heel, we're now on TuneIn for every broadcast, which I think you have to be almost now.
Yep.
We've gotten we have a official athletic, both the website GoHeels.com and the Go Heels app. You can hear the broadcast for free streaming on both of those. We've allowed our affiliates now, and we've got over 40 of them to stream our broadcast now through their individual websites, and so that's been a big plus. And I know this isn't why you asked that question, Joel, but you have to do that.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and it took a really long time, and there's reasons you don't care about why it took a really long time, but you can't just rely on radio anymore. And while that's still that's not going away, but we needed on our broadcast, we needed to make it easier for people to access what we were doing. And it took a long time for me to convince people and for us to get out of different contracts. But the key is the ease of access now. And so it's been a huge plus for us this year as far as our listenership and just people being able to be involved with our broadcast and getting all these different ways that they can hear it. We've also, we're in the second year now. We used to do a daily, we called it the Daily Show. It was a little just 2-3 minute show where we would send it out to our affiliates every day, and it was just kind of a little daily update. But at some point, we realized this was not the most effective way to do this anymore, and so we started our own podcast. And we've had a ton of success with it. We've had a lot of fun with it. We just actually did our 100th episode earlier this week, and it's called The Carolina Insider, and people love for people to listen to that. It's on iTunes. It's on Stitcher. It's on all the different ways that you can get your podcasts. The Twitter address for that is @Carolina_pod. And we have a ton of fun with that. In fact, we have Justin Jackson, former Tar Heel, who's of course with the Sacramento Kings now. He's our guest on the show coming up later this week.
Nice.
So that's a fun way that we're able to get to our fans as well.
Jones Angell joining us here on Play-by-Playcast. I liked his honesty and his candor when it came to specific calls, which is something we've done a little bit on this podcast with various guests in the past, but not a ton, like breaking down specific calls. So that was kind of cool to dive into the Giovanni Bernard touchdown, to dive into the national championship calls, wins and losses, and kind of dissect that a little bit. And then I liked his candor as well in terms of when I said, where have you improved most and grown most over the last 7 years as the voice of the North Carolina Tar Heels? He was upfront and honest about that. And it's good to hear, and it's one of those good reminders that, hey, we're all human. We all have our own ways of, as Jones mentioned, getting to where we are in this business, but also, physically, like which job you have, but also in terms of, the product we produce on the air. So it was kind of cool to hear his perspective on how he's grown, in his product and in himself over the last couple of years since he has become the voice of the North Carolina Tar Heels. Many thanks, though, to Jones Angell for joining us this week on the pod. Really random aside, by the way, like this is coming out, if you're listening to this podcast on time, on Friday, January 26th. On Thursday, January 25th, the XFL was relaunched by Vincent Kennedy McMahon. Went away after its 1-year run in 2001, and it's back. It'll debut in 2020, And, like, raise your hand really high if you're one of those people that said, oh, my God, the XFL is back. I need to figure out how to broadcast this. Because I was one of them. I'm just curious. I'm intrigued by it. I was intrigued by it then. I played Fantasy XFL, like Jeff Brom and Tim Lester were my fantasy quarterbacks, which was an awesome conversation to have with Tim Lester at Mac Media Day, because he's now the Western Michigan head coach this past year. But, I was thinking when I saw this was the XFL 30 for 30 on ESPN, I really wanted to kind of have Matt Vasgersian on at some point on this podcast to talk about what broadcasting the XFL was like. It might be tougher now because he just picked up the Sunday Night Baseball duties, so congratulations to Matt Vasgersian. Credit where it's due there, but I still, with the XFL coming out, would love to talk about what broadcasting the original XFL was like with Matt Vasgersian. So we'll see what's up the sleeve coming up at some point here on an upcoming episode of Play-by-Playcast. It is interesting, too, by the way. Vince McMahon is super, like, cutting-edge guy in a lot of ways, and outside of the wrestling business, I don't know if he necessarily gets the credit. The XFL, like, invented the Skycam. That was talked about at great length in the 30 for 30 documentary. And when you watch Vince McMahon's press conference today, he was talking about how the new XFL in 2020 would be broadcast. And, he talked about multiple platforms, and you'd be able to watch on your television, on a big screen or a small screen, and everything in between. So I'm actually kind of curious. Don't put it past Vince McMahon to, in some way, and it might not seem like it initially, but it'll probably make some sort of lasting impact, revolutionize, if nothing else is successful about the XFL. I would not put it past him to revolutionize or add or change in a noticeable way, eventually, if not immediately, how we consume sports on television. And that is something that I think as media types can certainly be something to get excited about with the return of the XFL. Some really good guests coming up on some podcasts over the next several weeks. I mentioned wanting to get Joe Tate on the podcast, the legendary voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers. He will not be on next week. He will be on soon after, though. So if you've been an admirer of Joe Tate, as many guests on this podcast have been over the time that we've had these conversations, and, before that, Joe Tate will be an upcoming guest here on Play-by-Playcast, and a couple other cool names up our sleeve as well. So stay locked in every Friday morning. Find us on Twitter at PXPcast. I'm at Joel Godet. The music playing is Marshmallow, and that means we are out of time. Many thanks to Jones Angell for joining us. We'll see you back here in 7 days. Play-by-Playcast. We're out.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.